Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection, the place where we come to gather and connect each week, whether it's physically here in the building at Spirit and Truth Sanctuary or you're joining us online. Everyone is welcome, no matter how you choose to connect. We will begin today with our devotion, which we will prepare our hearts for by saying together our prayer of surrender. Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. Take from me what you will. Awaken in me what you will. The Christ man is around me. The Christ mind is in me. The Christ power flows through me. And the Christ mystery exists as me. I believe it. I perceive it. And now I receive it. I am surrendered. Amen. And so it is. All right, the title of our devotion today is Poison or Promise, speaking specifically of the Bible. Let's say the affirmation together. Today, I choose promise, freedom, liberty, and peace, and my study of the Bible and other holy books will not lead me toward poison, enslavement, or restriction. Okay, notice that phrase that was used here, I choose. That's going to be a big part of the teaching later on. And what it's basically saying is, look, here are the things that I value: freedom, liberty, and peace, and I would add to those love. And any information in any holy book I read, the Bible included, that doesn't lead me to those things or that doesn't promote those things in my life, I don't accept. Or in other words, I won't allow the rigidity or the restrictive nature of some of the material in these holy books, including the Bible, to poison my mind against those principles that I value. Instead, I choose to follow the promise that is contained in them. And they all pretty much have both, as the title suggests, poison and promise. All religions and the writings associated with them are a mixture of both holy words and precepts that were inspired by Spirit, by God, and the words of the men and or women, mostly men, who wrote them, which are interpreted through their individual and cultural filters and biases and life experience. The particular story that the devotion uses as an example of this is a debate that occurred in the mid-1800s between two civil rights leaders in the movement to abolish slavery, Frederick Douglass and a man named Henry Garnett. Garnett was in favor of sending Bibles to the Southern slaves, but Douglass opposed this idea and even went so far as to call the Bible a book of poison due to the fact that certain passages in it seem to support slavery. So about halfway down in the first paragraph of the text, it says, "Is the Bible a book of promise or poison? Does the Bible foster peace or build a prison? Is the glass half empty or half full? It teaches equality and promotes slavery. It envisions an egalitarian society while it simultaneously speaks degradingly toward women. Wow, how complex and contradictory." So how do we decide? There is a middle path that allows us to keep the Bible while not allowing it to become a poisonous weapon. This path involves rightly dividing the word of truth. And then he references 2 Timothy 2:15, and I guess I just gave away the fact that it was my brother who wrote today's devotion. He continues, "The difficult reality is that the Bible is full of both promise and poison. The same Bible that delivers us is also capable of imprisoning. So, we must leave the debates of biblical accuracy knowing that we can prove, or I would add, disprove, just about any philosophy by how we use and manipulate certain scriptures. If reading the Bible is not about accuracy, then perhaps it is about presenting us with a mirror or revealing to us our personal consciousness. The question is no longer simply who or what is right or wrong, but rather, why are you attracted to specific teachings or specific parts of it? So as I said a couple of weeks ago, you can find and justify anything in the Bible and with the Bible. And you can tell a lot about a person by which scriptures they choose to quote or cite on a regular basis. Some people are always drawn to the verses about sin and judgment and punishment and wrath, while others are always drawn to the scriptures about love and peace and mercy. It's all in there, and each of us gets to choose what part of it we want to focus on. From this perspective, the devotion ends, the Bible can be seen as a revealer of consciousness showing us who we are. Let us choose the higher vibration. So we're going to talk a lot more about that in today's teaching. But let's conclude the devotion portion of our morning now with the prayer. Higher mind, strengthen me to choose promise rather than poison. Amen. Okay, deep breath now. We're going to need a lot of deep breaths today because our subject matter is a little heavy, and we're going to try to look at it from a very spiritually mature perspective. And some topics that I'm going to bring up will be sensitive for a lot of people, as well as a bit controversial and just a little bit adult in nature. But as always, I'll ask you to eat what you can, leave the rest. Please remember that as I teach you about everyone else, I too have my own filters and lenses that I look at life through, and that might be a little bit different from yours, and that's okay. A lot of what I say today is my personal opinion, which you are free to disagree with. I'm just offering you things to consider. Having said that, let's move on to our connection affirmation, which was formerly known as the morning blessing. I allow perfect health in my body, perfect peace in my mind, perfect unconditional love in my heart, and the perfect divine timing of spirit to guide my life in thought, word, and deed. Okay, I said earlier that a big part of today's teaching was going to be about the power of choice. And the devotion we just went through was a great setup for what I want to talk about today. I borrowed the title from a book that we actually did a study series on back in late 2013 into early 2014. It was a book called Radical Forgiveness. And the concepts it discusses are indeed radical to the way most of us have been taught. And as I said, it takes a high level of spiritual maturity to grasp them. And if you listen today and consider and then decide that this way of thinking and viewing events that occur is not for you, then that's fine. I'm just going to throw it out there as an option, as one way of looking at and interpreting circumstances that are sometimes difficult to navigate. I love the statement, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. This same concept was alluded to in our devotion, talking about the Bible, when it said the Bible can be seen as a revealer of consciousness, showing us who we are. So the Bible, like a lot of other things, is a mirror. And we can make the same statement about it that I just made about the world. We don't read the Bible as it is. We read it as we are, or we are drawn to the parts of it that we resonate with, whatever level we're vibrating on, whatever level of consciousness we're living on. And then the last line of the devotion was, let us choose the higher vibration. And that's what we're going to attempt to do today. That's a right and a power that we all have, that we were given by God. Free will, the power of choice. There's a scripture in Deuteronomy that says, this day I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life. So we see right there that we are given a choice. We're going to talk today about how we choose to view and to judge things that happen, either in our own lives or what we see taking place in the lives of others, that whatever choice we make about those things affects and determines our own quality of life. An incident occurred several months ago that was captured on video and recently went viral on the internet, and a lot of people had a lot to say about it, and different people had very different interpretations of it. And as I've just taken the last few minutes laying out for you, how people interpreted this revealed a lot about how they see the world and what they choose to focus on. The incident I'm referring to involved the Dalai Lama and a young boy who was at a gathering where he was speaking in India. I don't know how many of you saw it. And the little boy asked if he could come up on stage after the speech to get a hug from the Dalai Lama and to be blessed. And so the Dalai Lama said, of course, come on, let him come. When he got up to where the Dalai Lama was sitting, there was a short, playful interaction between them, during which the Dalai Lama stuck out his tongue and then invited the little boy to suck it, okay, which did not happen, by the way. The little boy didn't do it. And before anybody starts clutching their pearls, I want to explain a few things about this incident from my perspective. Okay, first, English is not the Dalai Lama's first language. And the phrase in Tibetan that he was using is literally translated as eat my tongue, not the word suck. But even that, from our Western culture and perspective, is at the very least gross, and at the worst, highly inappropriate and overtly sexual in nature. However, there are so many other contributing factors to this story, which we're going to dig through now in an effort to prove what my beginning premise was, that what people choose to see, how they choose to interpret things, and especially how harshly they choose to judge others, says so much more about them and their level of consciousness than the person that they are judging. All right, so before we go any further, let me say this. I am fully aware that sometimes children are sexually abused. I understand that that's a reality. I also know that this is sometimes perpetrated by people who are considered spiritual leaders. I'm not sticking my head in the sand and denying that that is something that happens. And I know that there's a high likelihood that a certain percentage of us sitting here in this room or watching me online have experienced sexual abuse at some point in your lives. And if that's ever happened to you, you're going to look at any incident like this one that I've just referenced through a different lens than someone who has not experienced that. I'm not saying there aren't valid reasons for everyone to see things the way they see them, and I'm not making a judgment about how anyone sees anything. I'm just going to try to bring some balance and maybe introduce you to a different perspective of it today in an effort to choose to look at it from the highest vibration possible, okay? So, like everybody else, I saw the still photo and read the headline about this, and of course the media sensationalized it for its own purposes, and I was at first shocked and a little grossed out and concerned, but I decided to go and find the entire clip, not just the edited version that went viral, and I watched the whole thing in context. And then I watched a few videos made by some spiritual teachers that I follow, and I read some comments from both sides. People who were defending the Dalai Lama and people who were accusing him of wrongdoing. And I rightly divided and then formed an opinion for myself instead of rushing to judge a man who has literally devoted his entire life, I think he's in his late 80s now, to the service and spiritual development of his fellow man. Here's one of the first things I found and read. It's an explanation of the actual cultural significance of what the Dalai Lama did and said by a Tibetan person. It says the Tibetan phrase "chela se," and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, means eat my tongue. And in Tibetan culture, It's associated with the common practice of grandparents not only giving a pop kiss, which means a short kiss on the lips, to small children, but also giving a small candy or piece of food to children from their own mouths, directly mouth to mouth. Again, this may offend our sensibilities as Westerners who were raised in America. We would be like, ugh. But in Tibet, this is what they say. Let me go on. It says, this may be the norm. This may not be the norm in your culture, but in ours, it's commonly done. This was, again, written by a person from Tibet. After the elder gives a kiss and a candy, since there is nothing more left to give, nothing more in their mouth, they will say the phrase, okay, now eat my tongue. Not suck, as His Holiness misspoke due to his less than proficient English. The Tibetan phrase is chela sa, or say, and is said with the subtext, I've given you all my love, with the kiss and the candy, so that's it. All that's left for you to do, if you want any more, you're going to have to eat my tongue. That's what it means. It's a playful thing that the children understand. This is a Tibetan custom. And then the person ends by saying this, if we are honest with ourselves, we know that when we form an opinion on any topic without considering the many aspects of context in any given situation, we are choosing to allow a significant degree of ignorance in our reasoning. Or in other words, we are choosing to view it from a vibration other than a higher one. All right, so one more piece I'll read from a woman named Teal Swan, who is a spiritual teacher, about this, and then we'll move on. She said, the edited version of the incident caught on video of the interaction between the Dalai Lama and a young boy in India was taken out of both situational and cultural context to make it look like what he initiated was what people are now calling a blatantly sexual act with a child. People are now coming out against His Holiness and comparing this to real incidents of sexual abuse of children that do happen in our world. Aside from the fact that in Tibet, the tongue is not considered a sexual organ the way it is in other places in the world, and aside from the fact that people in Tibet often stick out their tongues as a sign of greeting and even respect to one another, I need to explain something about Tibetan culture. This type of teasing and bartering for affection that we witnessed between this child and the Dalai Lama is common between elders and children. If a child asks for something, which this little boy actually did, he asked for a hug and a blessing, it is common for the adult to tease them by bartering for affection, for example, by asking for a kiss first. A common cultural tease is to say, I've already given you all I have, and the only thing left is for you to eat my tongue. And then they'll open their mouth and stick out their tongue as if to prove they're telling the truth and are not hiding any more candy. Now, this is an expression that makes no sense outside the context of Tibetan culture. It's a phrase that does not translate well, even in its exact translation. The problem is the Dalai Lama is not fluent in English, and he did not translate it exactly. He used the word suck rather than eat, and just like that, the cultural expression was literally lost in translation. If you take the time to watch the entire interaction rather than the edited clip, you'll see the playful nature of it, and also that it was initiated by the child asking for something. What transpired is exactly how Tibetan elders show children affection. There was nothing sexual or abusive going on, and I say this not only as a very well-traveled person, but also as a survivor of childhood sex abuse myself. This is her talking. What this incident does is put a massive spotlight on some of the biggest blocks to harmony and unity that we face in this world. Serious cultural differences, language barriers, as well as the media being deliberately manipulative and weaponized. Regardless of what culture we come from, we project our own beliefs, our own practices, our own traditions, our rules, our taboos on the rest of the world as if it is a given that ours are right and true and should be shared and respected by everyone. All of us draw conclusions and make assumptions based on our own cultural biases. If you travel to countries other than your own, you will immediately see that what is normal in one culture can seem not only weird, but offensive and downright wrong in others. I don't feel I can teach the things I teach about spiritual unity and let this go by without saying something. And so that's what she had to say, which I tend to agree with. Okay, so that's a lot to digest, and I know this topic is not particularly comfortable for any of us, but again, it goes to my point. We all get to choose how we see things. And part of living in higher consciousness is being able to recognize when we're seeing things through our own cultural bias and being open-minded enough to realize our view of things is not the only one, and what seems right to us may be very wrong to others, and vice versa. For instance, how many of us women regularly go outside in the summertime here in America with sleeveless shirt on, or maybe a pair of shorts, and we don't think a thing about it? Now, in a Muslim country, a woman could be arrested or worse for that. How many of us, especially here in the South, have ever looked at a cute little chubby baby and grabbed its cheek, or even put its foot up to our mouth, or put its toes in our mouth and said, "Oh, I want to eat you up"? Okay, that's a common phrase here in the South, but absolutely no one mistakes that for meaning we actually want to eat that child or that we're a cannibal. So the bottom line is sometimes we judge too quickly and too harshly simply because we are choosing to see things from a very narrow-minded perspective, limited to how we were raised or as a result of something that has happened to us. I was in a restaurant once with a young mother and her daughter, and the little girl was about 2 years old, and we were eating, and an elderly couple walked by on their way out, and they stopped and were admiring the little girl and saying how cute she was, and we were just making pleasant small talk. And so right before they left, the gentleman leaned down and he grabbed her cheek, and I know that in today's culture you're not supposed to touch another person's child without asking, but the generation he came from, it was okay. So he just grabbed her on the cheek and he said, "Oh, darling, you're so cute. I'd take you home with me in a minute." And I thought, and then they walked out and I thought, oh, how sweet. That was such a lovely little interaction. And then I looked across the table at the mother and I understood immediately from the look on her face, she did not get that impression. And she actually said, "I bet he would take her home, dirty old man." And I thought, wow, that's what you got from that. That's what you took away from that interaction. And then I thought, you know, how horrible, how unfortunate for you to live in that level of suspicion of other people. So again, while I know sometimes people do have evil intentions, and we can never really get inside someone else's mind and see exactly what their motivation is, I have found personally that I'm happier and more at peace when I believe the best about people until I'm proven wrong. So remember a few weeks ago, I was talking about Brene Brown, and she was talking to her husband, and she asked him the question, "Do you generally believe people are doing the best they can?" And he went away and thought about it and came back and said, "I don't know. There's no way for me to know that. However, what I do know is this. I'm better off, and my life is more peaceful and easy and flows more smoothly when I do assume that people are doing the best that they can." Or in other words, he was saying, when I give people the benefit of the doubt instead of jumping to the worst conclusion. And that is a choice. And this is where the information from the book Radical Forgiveness comes in. So much of the quality of our lives depends on how we choose to see the world and everything that goes on in it. I want to read now a few passages from this book that might help us view things from a little different perspective and help us choose to be open-minded and generous with our judgment of others, and also of events that happen in our own lives. And I'll remind you again, this is not a perspective that I believe is mandatory. It's just an option. Eat what you can, leave the rest. Like I said, it's a choice. So this passage begins by talking about the difference between traditional forgiveness and radical forgiveness, and the choice that each of us has to practice either. Says, things are not always what they seem. What appears to be cruel and nasty behavior on someone's part might be exactly what we need and have indeed called forth or attracted to us. Situations that appear to be the worst that could possibly befall us may hold the key to our healing something deep within us that keeps us from being happy or prevents our growth. The people who seem to us to be the most troublesome and the least likable may therefore be our greatest teachers. What we think they do to us, they actually do for us. If I am right about this, then it follows that whatever appears to be happening is seldom what is truly occurring. Beneath the apparent circumstances of every situation exists a wholly different reality, a different world altogether. When we shift our perspective to this possibility, we become open to the idea that nothing wrong took place and that in fact there is nothing to forgive. This is precisely the notion that defines radical forgiveness. It's also what makes it radical. Traditional forgiveness takes it as a given that something wrong has happened. Radical forgiveness, on the other hand, takes the position that nothing wrong happened and that consequently there is nothing to forgive. With traditional forgiveness, the willingness to forgive is present, but so is the residual need to condemn. Therefore, victim consciousness is maintained and nothing changes. With radical forgiveness, the willingness to forgive is also present, but not the need to condemn. Therefore, the victim consciousness is dropped and everything changes. Victim consciousness is defined as the conviction that someone else has done something bad to you, and as a direct result, they are responsible for the lack of peace and happiness in your life. Traditional forgiveness should not be seen as inferior to radical forgiveness. It is simply different. Like I said, it's a choice. When used in the context of a certain set of beliefs that are firmly rooted in the physical world and in everyday human reality, traditional forgiveness is the only form of forgiveness possible and has great value in its own right. It calls upon the finest of human qualities and characteristics, such as compassion, mercy, tolerance, humility, and kindness. The lens we are using to view a situation will determine whether we are using traditional forgiveness or radical forgiveness. Each provides us with a completely different point of view. But we should not fall into the trap of thinking of it in terms of either or. It's a both and situation. This is because we live with one foot in each world and therefore reference situations through either lens or both lenses at the same time. While being fully grounded in the world of humanity, we remain connected to the world of divine truth through our soul. These two worlds represent two ends of the vibrational scale. Depending upon our vibration at any moment, we move up and down the scale toward one end or the other. The world of humanity is the world of form and holds the energy and patterns of death, change, fear, limitation, and duality. The world of divine truth has no physical form and carries the energy and patterns of eternal life, immutability, infinite abundance, love, and oneness with God. Because we live in both worlds at the same time, which world we experience at any given moment depends upon our awareness of them and how awake we are. So, we're going to talk more about these two worlds in a moment, but I want to back up right now and just give you a little more explanation of what this concept of radical forgiveness is based on. Radical forgiveness makes very little sense to the rational mind, at least to that part of mentality that is grounded in everyday reality as perceived through the five senses. That's because radical forgiveness operates according to spiritual, not physical law. It is essentially a metaphysical idea. Nevertheless, in order to wrap our minds around the basic idea as best we can, it helps to go over some of the assumptions that it is based on to give some structure to the concept. Okay, so the first assumption when you're talking about radical forgiveness is this: life is not random. It provides the purposeful unfoldment of our own divine plan, with opportunities to make choices and decisions in every moment, guided by either our higher self or our ego self. So this is similar to what we talk about, the different levels of consciousness, what we choose to live on. We can choose to believe things that happen we can choose to believe that things are happening to us, and that we're a victim, that life is random, and that we don't have any control over the things that happen. Or we can choose to believe, just as this said, that life is not random, and that it's our choices that create our reality, and that we come here to this earth in order to grow and evolve through certain lessons. Basically, that we choose to be here, and that more or less we choose the conditions that we will face and then have to make decisions about. All right, second assumption. Through relationships, we grow and learn. Through relationships, we heal and are returned to wholeness and truth. We need others to mirror our misperceptions and our projections, and to help us bring repressed material to consciousness for healing. So this is saying we choose to use our relationships with others as a mirror, and to learn about ourselves and see what's down there inside that needs to come up and be healed. Or as Ram Dass said, that I said one time, we use these little conflicts with each other as grist for the mill of our own awakening. All right, third assumption. We come into this physical life experience with a mission: to fully experience a particular energy pattern so we can feel the feelings associated with that pattern, and then transform that energy through love. So we come here to have certain experiences so that we can learn specific lessons. Now, back to the two different worlds of human and divine. The veil between the two worlds is definitely becoming thinner. Radical forgiveness contributes to this process both at the individual level and at the level of collective awareness. Yet the two types of forgiveness remain literally worlds apart. Each demands a different way of looking at the world and at life. Clearly, traditional forgiveness offers itself as a way of living in the world, while radical forgiveness is nothing less than a spiritual path. In terms of our capacity to evolve spiritually, radical forgiveness offers extraordinary potential to transform consciousness. And this potential far exceeds what is possible with traditional forgiveness. Yet we must recognize that we all still live in the world of humanity, and at certain times we will fall short of what we might think of as the spiritual ideal. When we find ourselves immersed in pain, for example, it becomes virtually impossible for us to move into radical forgiveness. When we have recently experienced harm at the hand of another, such as being raped, we cannot be expected to accept in that moment that that experience was something we wanted and that it represents the unfolding of a divine plan. We will not have the receptivity necessary to entertain that idea. It can only come later, in moments of quiet reflection, not in the heat of anger or in the immediate aftermath of trauma. Then again, we must continually remind ourselves that what we have created is the spiritual ideal. That we have created circumstances in our lives that help us grow and learn. That the lessons we need to learn are contained in the situation, and that the only way to obtain the growth from the experience is to go through it. So I use this quote from Dr. Kim Duramo a lot, all the time. When you're in a situation that you don't want to be in, you need to pause and ask the question, what else is possible here? However, that's not always a question that can be answered in the immediate. Our choice in this is not so much whether or not to have the experience. Spirit decides this for us, but how long we're going to hang out in victim consciousness because of it. Should we choose to quickly let go of victimhood through radical forgiveness, it is comforting to know that we have a process that will make that happen. Traditional forgiveness, by contrast, has little to offer in this regard. Traditional forgiveness does not factor in the notion of a spiritual mission and maintains its belief in and fear of death. Radical forgiveness sees death as an illusion and takes the view that life is eternal. Traditional forgiveness views life as a problem to be solved or a punishment to be avoided. It experiences life as a random set of circumstances that just happens to us for no reason. Radical forgiveness sees life as entirely purposeful and motivated by love. Radical forgiveness also lovingly sees the imperfection inherent in human beings, but sees perfection in the imperfection. Radical forgiveness recognizes that forgiveness cannot be willed or bestowed. We must be willing to forgive and to give the situation over to a higher power. Forgiveness of any kind comes not from effort, but from being open to experiencing it. All right, so they mentioned a process that you can go through if you choose this path of radical forgiveness, and here it is. This four-step process takes only a few moments, but it is one that literally could save you from getting endlessly caught up in the drama of what is happening and going to victim land for an extended stay. When something happens and we get upset, it is extremely easy for us to forget everything we ever knew about the concept of radical forgiveness. Until these principles become firmly anchored in our minds, whenever our upset creates a lot of emotional turmoil, our tendency is to always default to victim consciousness. The problem is, once there, we tend to hang out for a very long time. Without a radical forgiveness viewpoint, you will probably stay there for years, which is what most people do. This can be a rough ride. One way to stop the roller coaster is to use the four-step process before ending up in victim land. As soon as you find yourself getting upset over something, or even if you find yourself making judgments, feeling self-righteous, or wanting to change something about a situation, use this process to bring your consciousness back into alignment with the principles. Now, this applies to things that are happening in our own lives, as well as things that we witness out in the wider world, such as the example that we started with today of the incident with the Dalai Lama. We can use this process to figure out how we view things that are happening to others, and we can use those experiences that we see others going through for our own growth and evolution. Okay, step one is to say, look what I created. The first step reminds us that we are the creators of our reality. However, we create circumstances for our own healing. So do not assume guilt for what happens. Being quick to judge, we often use this step as a way to beat ourselves up. We say, look what I've created. Oh, it's terrible. I must be a terrible person and a spiritual failure. Please do not fall into this trap, for if you do, you will buy into the illusion. Step two, I notice my judgments and I love myself for having them. This step acknowledges that as humans, we automatically attach a whole string of judgments, interpretations, questions, and beliefs to situations. Our task involves accepting the imperfection of our own humanity and I would add, and the humanity of others, and loving ourselves for having these judgments, including the one that says we must be a spiritually deficient person for creating this reality. Our judgments are part of ourselves, so we must love them as we love ourselves. Doing this connects us with what is actually happening in our body and mind and brings us into the present through our feelings. Our energy then shifts quickly and allows us to go to the third and fourth step of the process. So, this is just becoming aware. Like I was talking about before, understanding that we all have these cultural biases and filters that have resulted from our own experiences, and that's okay as long as we recognize that that's what they are. Step 3, I am willing to see the perfection in the situation. The willingness step is essential in the radical forgiveness process. It equates to a prayerful surrendering in the moment to the divine plan and the willingness to love ourselves for not being able to see the plan directly. Okay, so this is very similar to what Eckhart Tolle teaches. Don't fight or be in resistance to what is. Accept it for what it is. Doesn't mean you have to stay there. Doesn't mean you can't change things, but you have to accept it first and know that on some level it was on purpose. Step 4, I choose the power of peace. The fourth step represents a consequence of all the previous steps. By accepting that divine purpose is served in this situation and that what appears to be occurring may be illusory, we choose to feel peace and to use the power of peace in whatever action is required of us. The power of peace is found when we are fully present in the moment, acting with clarity and focus to do whatever may be required and being completely aware of our feelings. All right, so there it is in a nutshell. The process by which we can learn to practice this concept called radical forgiveness. Here's a short review. Step 1, look at what I created. Own it. Know that on some level you drew whatever situation it is to you in order to heal something in you that needs to be healed or to grow and expand into a higher level of consciousness. Step 2, I notice my judgments and I love myself for having them. If I am aware of the lens I'm looking through, and I know everyone else is looking through their lens just like I am. Step 3, I am willing to see the perfection in the situation. I accept what it is as it is, but then I ask the question, what else is possible here? What is good about this that I'm not seeing? And trust that there's always something good. And step 4, I choose the power of peace. I choose to give myself and everyone else the benefit of the doubt, and I believe we are all doing the best we can at whatever level of consciousness we're currently living on, and that looking at life that way is what's going to bring me the most peace. Then the book gives one more bit of advice. It says, instead of seeing a situation as tragic and undesirable, become willing to entertain the idea that this is the divine plan unfolding exactly as it needs to unfold, and that each of the parties involved, including the ones on the periphery, okay, going back to the example of the Dalai Lama and the little boy and everybody in that room and all of us who saw it on video, all parties involved are in actuality getting exactly what they subconsciously want on a soul level. And that is true no matter how the situation works out. Deep inside our subconscious mind, we are in touch with our mission. Spirit keeps presenting us with opportunities to transform victim energy by bringing certain emotions to the surface. Every time a situation occurs to you or around you, shift your consciousness from one of judgment to seeing the perfection in it. Instead of accepting any story at face value, help transform the energy of it by knowing that the people in the story are living out their part in the divine plan. Do not see anyone as a victim and refuse to label anyone a villain. Each of us can embrace our life's mission by practicing radical forgiveness in this way. And if achieved by enough of us, the shift in perception that allows us to see the perfection in each seemingly negative situation will transform it so that the need for such energy patterns disappears. All right, so I'm going to end with one of my very favorite quotes by Dr. Wayne Dyer. He says, "You do not define anyone with your judgment. You only define yourself as someone who needs to judge." In other words, when we let go, when we're living on a high enough vibration to let go of our judgment, then the situations that cause judgment to arise in us will disappear because they're no longer needed. Once you get rid of your judgment, Spirit can stop sending you things to judge because you've handled it. You've learned your lesson. You've passed the test. Case closed. So, amen? Amen. Thank you for listening to that today. I know it was a little tough to get through some of that stuff, and we all have our opinions on it, but I just wanted to give a little bit different perspective on it. And again, you can choose to live your entire life just with the traditional forgiveness of believing that people do things that are horrible to you and they take your peace away, but you have the grace to still forgive them. You can live in that world if you want to. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to go up a little higher and see that maybe, just maybe, things that you see at the moment as negative are in the end working together for your good and their good and everybody's good, then that's what I believe will make us the happiest. Okay, let's stand together and sing our ending song. Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say amen. Blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say amen. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you tomorrow night at 6:30 online for our study series. Friday morning at 7 a.m. for devotion. And remember, do not show up here at the physical church on Sunday. It is our 5th Sunday online. Enjoy your family. Have a wonderful day. Tune in and watch us. We will be with you then until we see you again. I love you. Be at peace. Have a great week.